Hey guys, and welcome to Cannamantv. My name is Connor McLeod, and in this extremely informative interview, I speak with author and documentarian Paul van Hartmann. In this interview, we discuss why cannabis is essential, Paul's book, Cannabis vs. Climate Change, the socio-political barriers inhibiting the true potential of cannabis, what the human race needs to do in order to save itself from self-imposed extinction, the sense of unity and tradition which the cannabis plant cultivates and why society needs this now more than ever. Make sure to like and subscribe, and join me on Patreon, where you could help to build a stronger cannabis media platform. Now then, let's talk cannabis. Individuals that are unaware of your work, which is substantial, I must say. Paul is a cannabis scholar, documentarian, filmmaker, researcher, author, public speaker. Paul also founded the Project Peace newsletter, California Cannabis Ministry. He also submitted to the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization with his expertise on food security and nutrition. So your expertise is substantial in that, Paul. And I thought appropriately, to get us started, I would just ask you, why is cannabis essential?
Well, the most obvious thing that makes cannabis essential is it's the only common seed with 3 essential fatty acids in proper proportion for long-term consumption. Cannabis is the only plant that provides us with the essential nutrition we need from conception to death for optimum health and proper development. And if we are lacking in the essential fatty acids, then we suffer suboptimal health and improper development. And in the context of a world that is becoming more polluted and under increasing UVB radiation, the disadvantage of suboptimal nutrition becomes increasingly more apparent. And that's what we're seeing is an increasingly toxic environment and essentially suboptimal nutrition as the mineralization of the soil is depleted, and the essential fatty acids are almost non-existent in people's diets because the intake of fish is reduced, and fish was the previously the source of essential fatty acids for most people. So that's the first one, is the essential fatty acids. The other one, though, is a global necessity, because the boreal forests and the marine phytoplankton used to produce twice the volume of atmospheric aerosol terpenes as they do now. Because when I was born, there was twice as many trees in the boreal forest, and there was twice as much phytoplankton in the oceans. Those populations have been reduced by half just in my lifetime. So the science was done by the air pollution laboratory in Stockholm, Sweden, by Hans Christian Hansen. And he was quoted in the Guardian News in 2006, April 13th, 2006, in an article entitled "Fragrance of Pine Forests Helps to Slow Climate Change." And so when I read that article and I found out that the terpenes from the pine forests help to block the solar UVB radiation, they act like little crystals up in the atmosphere to refract the UVB. And they also serve as cloud condensation nuclei to form bright and persistent clouds. Well, I realized that there are only three populations of species on this planet that produce that volume of there's marine phytoplankton, and there's cannabis. Those are the only three populations capable of replenishing the atmosphere with the volume of terpenes we need to block the increasing UVB radiation. Well, the boreal forests and the marine phytoplankton are not going to regenerate under present conditions. They're just not. And they're actually part of feedback loops that are increasing the rate of their demise, and therefore allowing more UVB radiation through to the surface of the planet. People are concerned about global warming. I write about global broiling because the UVB, the B stands for broiled. Right. And we need to think outside the box about cannabis when it comes to protecting the planet from the solar radiation. And that's the priority one, is to replenish the atmosphere with terpenes. Because if we sequester the carbon using machines or what other crazy schemes people are proposing, then we'll cook the surface of the planet. Because the carbon in the atmosphere provides a modicum of shade to the surface and helps to block the UVB. But if we don't replenish the atmosphere with the terpenes, then we'll just let more UVB through. And that's really not good. UVB radiation is very deadly. The planet is burning and the marine ecosystem is collapsing. And so anybody that asks me for data is more worried about THC than they are about UVB. And I can promise them that their fears are unfounded.
Not only that, misdirected, because I do think you're exactly right there, because I was doing that thing where a lot of people, you know what they're like, they criticize cannabis from any angle and they completely disregard the reason why in this category, which is obviously environmental protection, the cannabis has even been spoken about in the first place. They just attack the low-hanging fruit, essentially, and then they don't actually look at the application that's been promoted in the first place.
Well, it goes back to something that happened before any of us were born. We were born into a condition of treachery, essentially, where just before World War II, a Nazi spy by the name of Harry Anslinger gutted the United States hemp industry right before World War II. In 1937, the Marijuana Tax Act was passed, and in 1939, Hitler invaded Poland. And that was due to the espionage carried out by Harry Anslinger, which we live with to this day. Because what the racist industrialists of that age decided was that they were more in line with Hitler than they were with Roosevelt. And so people like Andrew Mellon, just sided with the Nazis and continued to do business with them during World War II. And so, history affords us the hindsight that is 2020, and we can see what happened, and we can see that the lies about cannabis that were told by these racist industrialists who were in competition with cannabis and who were essentially waging war against this country, we still continue to live with those lies. The lie that THC is bad for the human body. Well, that lie was dispelled when they discovered the endogenous cannabinoid system in the 80s. So, that fraudulent scheduling is something that just can't be resolved. And it's fundamental to all of the other imbalances that are based upon it. I call it the great lie of 1937, that THC is bad for the human body. Actually, the opposite is true. It's essential for the human body. Proper functioning of the human body necessitates THC and CBD and the other cannabinoids and a lot of the components in the whole cannabis plant. the essential fatty acids in the seed. You know, if somebody is worried about THC, they should really take a look at the proteins and the nutritional benefits of the cannabis seed and recognize that they're trading something very, very valuable against something that is based in a lie that was told before we were born. So, you know, it's a very, very thin curtain that obscures the truth. Yeah. And once you start looking at this plant, you can see that it's actually mankind's functional interface with the natural order. Yeah. Without cannabis, our species can never achieve sustainable existence on this planet.
Actually, I've heard that you saying that in one of your radio interviews, and I thought that to myself, like that quote itself is so penetrating on the basis of it, because the reality is, I think a lot of people get categorized down a particular tunnel when it comes to cannabis, and I think depending on your experience will depend on the degree in which the tunnel you go down. So people that are just new to cannabis will essentially see it all as one schizophrenia causing circumstance for the 30s, and then people that are really experienced with cannabis will be able to break down to the chemical basis of it and how it interacts. So we still have this extremely broad spectrum, or a polarized position really in society. And you've got one of the things where I think in your book where you touch on, I think, where is it? It's illegal to essential, a polar shift in values, which I think kind of that's been, I think you're obviously, unless I'm mistaken, your book was written in 2015, and we're in this position where that's what 6-7 years later, CBD has helped to kind of reintroduce people to cannabis more. So how do you think it's changed since 2015? Do you think there has been more of a bridge in the value gap?
Yes, I think there's been incremental progress at a rate that is too slow. Yeah. I think we are moving forward, but we're moving forward too slowly. I do see more reference to cannabis and climate change now. There's an organization that I work with in the Czech Republic, Hemp the Climate, that is publishing Hemp Today. And I'm one of the advisors for Hemp the Climate, and have presented since 2014 when my book was published. I've presented at the World Cannabis Congress in Slovenia 5 years in a row. So the information is getting out slowly, but it really is a situation where time is the limiting factor in the equation of survival. And we have to accelerate our process in recognition of where we are in the trajectory that we were born into. And we need to essentially grab the wheel and steer away from the brick wall that we're headed for.
How would you recommend that? Would you just to include hemp as a primary industrial crop? Would you say that would be a step forward?
Well, it's the only crop that's capable of producing complete nutrition and clean energy from the same harvest. So that's another reason that it's both unique and essential. That's one of the several reasons. And the fact that you can produce complete nutrition at the same time that you're providing for your energy needs is enormous. That means you're not inducing food insecurity by growing your energy. And cannabis is unique in that it provides not only the complete nutrition from the seed and the rest of the plant, but also the complete nutrition, the clean energy from the stem. And it provides the atmospheric aerosols, the terpenes that reflect the solar UVB radiation. It also sequesters the carbon, which we absolutely need to do, but it also produces an extraordinary volume of oxygen, which people take for granted. we need oxygen to breathe.
Yeah.
And because cannabis produces such an extraordinary volume of oxygen and terpenes and sequesters an extraordinary volume of carbon, and it regenerates the soil, and it provides feed and cover for wildlife, and it provides complete nutrition for people and for livestock. All of these things make cannabis both unique and essential. And that's why recognizing it as our functional interface with the natural order is inclusive of recognizing the environmental services associated with growing the industrial feedstock. And so what you're doing is you're connecting the healing of the planet to what I refer to as Gaia therapeutic industry. It's earth healing industry, as opposed to the Gaiacidal industry that everybody is participating in right now, myself included. I just put petrochemicals into my vehicle yesterday, and I'm not happy about it. I'd rather put hemp-based fuel into my vehicle, that's made from this. You can make fuel from this. In fact, here's another reason that cannabis is essential. Turning sunlight into usable energy for the greatest number of people in the most countries around the world in the shortest span of time is essentially the equation of survival. If we can figure out how to do that, then our children have a very slim chance of inheriting a livable planet. And the way that you turn sunlight into usable energy for the most people in the most countries around the world in the shortest span of time is to grow cannabis. Because that is the most efficient way to turn sunlight into something that you can then transform into cellulosic hydrogen, for example, through biodigestion, which is, I think, the most available way to the greatest number of people, because biodigestion is a very simple process, and people are already practicing biodigestion in different places around the world to produce methane. And it's just a matter of changing the microbial input to produce something that's less polluting, which is hydrogen. And so at the same time, wherever cannabis is grown for whatever reason, whether it's for recreational marijuana use or whether it's industrial hemp, there's a lot of stem material that's sitting around right now that's creating greenhouse gases. And so the waste stream of the industry needs to be regarded and needs to be responsibly transformed into an additional income stream. And a lot of that can happen once the environmental services are considered and afforded carbon credits, of course, but also the terpene credits and the oxygen credits, which haven't been discussed at all, to my knowledge. Those are concepts that I'm introducing into the conversation so that we can overcome the economic inertia that we were born into. The status quo is very aware of the competitive advantage that cannabis has in not only providing better forms of energy, cleaner forms of energy, but less expensive forms of energy. Because if you're growing cannabis at the rate, at the scale that is needed to replenish the atmosphere with terpenes, then that means you're going to have a lot of cannabis to work with. And at that scale of production, the energy profile and the income stream from cannabis energy makes it $1 trillion industry, because every region can grow cannabis just about in the world. And so if you have regional production of energy, then that means that people don't have to fight wars for oil. And the current toxic gaiacidal income streams that people are participating in as they criticize cannabis, they continue to disrespect nature by spending their money on toxic resources. And so, I mean, I understand people have a built-in irrational social prejudice against the cannabis plant because of prohibition. But the reality is, and this is where we differ from the political reality that we are enduring. The reality is that we have to change at a rate that requires public demand. The public has to exercise its right of demand to our elected officials, who don't seem to understand the value of this plant. And they don't seem to be willing to consider it, because the fact is, Connor, problems are profitable.
That's right.
For people selling solutions that don't work. And that's the situation that we were born into. That's the situation we continue to live with. The fact is that we were right about this plant for decades, and trying to tell the government, listen, you can't make it illegal because it's too valuable. You don't have the rightful jurisdiction. I've planted cannabis publicly twice and demanded to be arrested for something that can't possibly be within the rightful jurisdiction of any court, because cannabis is too valuable. And so to create scarcity of it is counterproductive. And
I think that's one of the things. I was going to say that there, Paul. I think that's one of the things what makes it so glaringly obvious that this is a injustice, to say the least, is that cannabis not only contributes positively towards the environment, it is symbiotically compatible with our physiology, and this is enormous. This is like it couldn't actually have been more of a win for the cannabis community when we stumbled across the endocannabinoid system. I mean, if there was ever a situation where somebody went nothing but net, you know what I mean? That was one of them. It's like our body is designed for this stuff.
Yeah. And the other thing is that not just human beings have an endocannabinoid system. Every creature on the planet, with a few exceptions, don't have an endocannabinoid system. So the fact is, and this is something else that I point out in my film, in my writing, is that mankind is far beyond rightful authority in legislating scarcity of a unique and essential natural resource upon which other species also depend for their health, evolution, and survival. And so, we're taking something away from the creatures of the earth that they have developed symbiotic relationship with. I have a film on my Twitter page that I pinned to the top of my Twitter page of a bee in my marijuana garden, rubbing itself down from antenna to stinger with cannabis resin. And I have had a theory for years. I've observed bees around cannabis, and it's obvious to me that they have a symbiotic relationship with the plant. And the film that I have on my Twitter page shows clearly that this bee and others insects that I've observed on cannabis take advantage of the plant in some way. And so, it's important for us to see ourselves as part of the web of life. All systems are created, all species are connected. All systems are connected, all species are connected in some way. And we have to just recognize that arbitrarily removing a unique and essential natural resource from that web is going to throw off dimensions of that we don't fully understand. And that's what's happened, is that in the last, the last 84 years of cannabis prohibition, we've gone to the edge of extinction, where we are balancing right now. And for us to recognize that if I'm right about cannabis and the terpenes in the atmosphere, then that's good news. That's the best news there is.
Yeah.
And if I'm wrong about it, well, we'll just solve world hunger.
Exactly.
I mean, there's no downside to proceeding and demanding that our governments and the suppression of cannabis agriculture, because the thing that we need to do, the one thing that we need to do, is we need to distribute hemp seed to every farmer and home gardener in every country on the planet, and just plant cannabis as fast as we can and pray it's not too late. That's really where we're at. The data, the studies, those can all come later. So, yeah, I mean, it's just a matter of distributing hemp seed or marijuana seed. It doesn't really matter.
It's funny. You actually reminded me of that, Paul, when you said at the beginning, you went, obviously to distribute it into your garden. Last year, 2 years ago, maybe 3 years ago now, I grew, obviously I'm in Scotland, so I grew a cannabis plant for the first time outside. And what was cool, what was funny was that my neighbour clearly told my landlord, because when it was like about 4 or 5 weeks away from harvest, it was right at the bottom of the garden. It looked beautiful. I was actually surprised at how healthy and how vibrant it looked, and then my landlord chapped the door and like it said, I'm gonna have to come and do a property inspection, like 2 days or something like that. I was like, okay. And she just came through, and I remember, because I had to take it out, obviously it was just disappointing. And I remember, because she came out the back door and marched straight to that spot and then just looked around. There was nothing there, and then she just went, right, okay, I better get going. I was like, Jesus. It must have been my neighbor.
Yeah. Well, see, that's the thing. The only problem anybody has ever had with cannabis has taken place in the context of prohibition.
Yeah, exactly. And it's funny that you should say that. There's so many people have said online when now in the UK, because there's a lot of private clinics and people can get medicine, people are responding by saying, my anxiety is not really went away because of consuming cannabis. It's went away because it's no longer illegal. Right.
And that's, I mean, the best medicine is the one that keeps you from getting sick in the first place.
Yeah.
And people need to understand that cannabis offers healing in advance of illness.
Yeah.
Cannabis is an effective preventative for many illnesses. And so, to look at cannabis objectively, what I call thinking outside the bong about cannabis, is, what can it do for people's health individually, aside from the prohibition and the government propaganda against it, running interference for the pharmaceutical industry in effect.
Yeah.
I mean, basically we live in a pharmacracy, where the pharmaceutical industry is pulling the strings on our politicians. It's quite clear. Yeah. The mainstream media is cheerleading for vaccinations tirelessly that aren't even vaccinations, really. This pandemic stuff, is revealing a lot of the manipulation that we're being subjected to, just because we're not being told about ivermectin, which is an effective treatment for and preventative for COVID, that the Frontline COVID Care Clinicians Alliance is talking about. And so, when you look at how obvious it is that we're being stampeded into forced medical procedures, which are a violation of the Nuremberg Code, we should recognize that the same government that's not telling us about ivermectin as an early onset treatment and preventative for COVID is the same government that's not telling us about the therapeutic benefits of cannabis, and it's maintaining the Schedule 1, the fraudulent Schedule 1 scheduling of something that can save people's lives. I mean, I've lost several close friends to illnesses that could have been prevented and or cured by cannabis, but they didn't have access to it, or they had a built-in prejudice against it because of what they had been told. And so, there's active harm being done to people on a scale that I refer to as a weapon of mass deception. And it's just people not being told about the nutritional benefits of eating cannabis seed, for God's sakes. This stuff here, that stuff there can prevent 98% of the diseases that are likely to kill you, and if you don't have access to hemp seed, then you're food insecure, because whatever you depend on for nutrition right now may or may not be around in a few years because of the conditions of the environment and the effects of increasing UVB radiation.
I actually saw that on an article, and it was about Madagascar and how there's been 4 years of no rainfall over obviously that 4 year period of time. That's the worst in 3 or 4 decades that they've had. I think they're looking at maybe almost 1 million children are severely malnourished, and the list goes on continuously, obviously negative impacts, and that's just as the conversation goes on. That's what I think myself, like, such a viable option to use hemp, and obviously I'm aware that obviously water irrigation systems would be necessary and things like that potentially, but the reality is hemp is highly viable, that it's most likely to be weather resistant to these situations, most likely to not.
Absolutely. And the fact is, if you want rain, then you plant hemp, because hemp produces the atmospheric aerosol terpenes that serve as cloud condensation nuclei. Now, you have to understand, cannabis has been on this planet for 35 million years. It's a crop that has evolved the ability to create its own rain.
Oh, I love that. This is just brilliant. I love that. No wonder there's it's absolutely insane. When some people become aware of, even like, let's say I do this regularly, and when you hear this stuff, it's insane. Because but when you first stumble across it, you can see why people wouldn't believe it. It does everything. The reality is that the underpinning of human society could potentially be completely realigned as a result of just bringing cannabis in more readily.
It's a polar shift in values.
Yeah, exactly. A polar shift in values. Perfect poetic softball. I love it.
Welcome to my world. These are things that I've been writing about and trying to essentially boil down into sound bites for 30 years. And, drawing relationships, connecting dots, talking with people all over the world who have much more experience and insight into different areas of this plant than I do. But it has turned out that I have a very broad view of cannabis and the industry, and I have been able to sort of foresee the direction of the industry based on the environmental necessity of growing at an enormous scale. And starting with that. And once you establish the scale of production, then a lot of things become possible. But the truth is, and this is one of the most amazing things, Connor, is that if we couldn't make one thing out of cannabis, if we couldn't use it for anything or eat the seed or do anything with it, we'd still have to grow it for its environmental services as fast as we can, and pray it's not too late, because time is running out at an accelerating rate. The window of opportunity is closing.
So how would you recommend?
And that's why.
How would you recommend? Because a lot of people will be sitting here urgently like, well, how do we apply this on a mass scale? What would you recommend in order to fast track that process?
We have to globalize essential civilian demand. We have to demand that the THC limits on seeded industrial hemp be completely eliminated, because they're completely obsolete in the context of global broiling. The emergency is that the planet is on fire and people don't know it because they can't see the fire. The fire is the UVB radiation. It's cooking the planet. It's drying the soil. It's drying the vegetation. The immune suppression, the genetic mutation as a result of increasing UVB radiation. All of these things are occurring at increasing rates at the polar latitudes, because that's where the increase in UVB is the greatest. And so, even though we don't feel it as much, though, it is increasing. It's more than doubled in the past 60 years, both in the level of UVB and the frequency of occurrence, the number of times per year that the UVB is in excess of safe levels has more than doubled. So, it's not ambiguous at all. Some people are comfortable in denying the global warming because they say it's cyclical and all that other stuff. But, the UVB is linear. It's increasing and it's accelerating. So, there is no argument in terms of climate change when it comes to the increasing UVB radiation. And the ozone layer is part of that, but the terpenes play probably an even greater role in protecting the planet from the sun, because that's what the boreal forest and the marine phytoplankton did for thousands of years, and has established a homeostasis that has been thrown out of balance in just the last half century. So, it's a situation where we have to understand that our species has only been on this planet for a few 100,000 years, less than 1 million years. And so we're very clever, but we're not very evolved. and the difference between being intelligent and being evolved is that evolved species don't become extinct. Intelligent species might. But we need to recognize that respect for nature is what has been lacking in our social evolution. And currently, because we base our economic system in toxic, unevenly distributed, finite natural resources, we are a gaiacidal parasitic species to this planet. And in order to achieve symbiosis, we need to recognize the economics of abundance and the dolphin economics that is made possible, the evolved economics that's made possible, that says, I help you, help me, help everybody. That's dolphin economics. And we have a very short span of time to learn it. And we can base it in the abundance that cannabis provides. We can't base dolphin economics in scarcity, which is what we are currently vested in with the fossil fuels economy and the military industrial complex and the nuclear industry and the pharmaceutical industry and all those other industries that are actually pushing us toward extinction, that are extinctionistic in in the neologisms that I have developed in order to accurately describe our condition. So
it's also the same corporations, same entities that are also pushing the rhetoric continuously that, excuse me, that cannabis isn't as efficient, isn't as symbiotic with the human capacity for development, sustainability. It's just this vicious cycle. A lot of people as well. I had a conversation with Sam, and he said the same thing. Like, some people are critical of those that think don't interact with these corporations in regard to cannabis. They've missed their opportunity, so just completely separate themselves. But the reality is, they're so integrated in society. There has to be something done to make them at least realign their order of business. Like, you see that with I think it was British American Tobacco, that they've now changed, and they're prioritizing to a much greater extent cannabis-based products. And that in itself is just it's an expression of the times, really, because that's only, even though many it will be a bittersweet process to many, because they're like, these are the same corporations that were largely suppressing cannabis less than 100 years ago. But the reality is, it's like, this is the way these things are. We need to take every opportunity as possible,
Sure, absolutely. And, the fact is that the corporations that are in competition with cannabis have the most to lose.
Mm.
And so they have the most to gain if they just redirect their resource base.
Yeah.
I mean, whatever they're making right now, they can make better, cheaper, with less pollution from cannabis.
Yeah.
Whether you're making it out of petroleum, you're making it from trees, or you're making it from cotton, or whatever it is that you're using as your resource base, you can make whatever you're making better.
I like the idea that these companies have actually had to become more eco-friendly by default. I like that.
Sure, because the thing is, if you can't compete with the environmental services of cannabis, then you can't compete.
Yeah.
Because environmental services are the NFT of the 21st century. Time is the limiting factor in the equation of survival. So time is the currency of the 21st century. Yeah. And because cannabis offers us so much in such an attenuated span of time, it really is our best hope for a livable future for everyone's children. Yeah. And so once you identified it, then it's not a multiple choice question. There's only one answer to the equation for replenishing the atmosphere, and for the best way to produce clean energy, and the best way to produce organic vegetable protein. I mean, God, we have hardly even talked about the proteins in cannabis. I mean, the edestin and albumin proteins are unique to cannabis seed. They're not found in any other common seed. And so, and they serve as the foundation for our immune system. And they enable our body to carry out enzymatic reactions that are essential to our optimum health. And I mean, all kinds of really, really fascinating, magical, alchemical processes that go on when you eat cannabis seed. And in fact, I have the distinction, I think, of having been the first person to make a drink from the whole cannabis plant, where I took the roots, the seeds, the leaves, the flowers, the pollen, and I blended them in a drink in 1997 for the first time. And I strained it, and it came out looking like green milk. And so I called it leche verde. And the leche verde, I think, is capable of reversing the degenerative aging process. And I was serving it to people at the Cannabis College in Amsterdam, where I was one of the founding members in 1996. Right. We started Green Prisoners Release in Amsterdam, and that became the Cannabis College. And then I wrote an essay entitled "The Fundamental Challenge of Our Time." And that was adopted as the manifesto for the world's first cannabis college, which That's is cool. Another thing that I'm very proud of. You know, I was active in Europe for about 10 years in the drug policy reform efforts there with NCOD and other drug policy activists. I was living in Amsterdam, in Holland for a couple of years. And I think I may also be the only person in the world ever to have their picture taken with a cop lighting their joint. So I've achieved.
You still got that? Do you still have that picture?
Oh yeah, sure. They have it on the.
Excellent.
There are actually two photographs, and they're on the Cannabis College Instagram page. You can see them. I think I may have them on my Instagram page as well. I mean, I'm one of the luckiest people in the world, Connor. I can't tell you how many things I've done that should have killed me.
That's very humbling to hear, Paul. That's very humbling. I like that.
Well, you know, I'm very grateful for my life. I mean, geez, I'm 66 years old. I've got a 14-year-old son.
Yeah,
you know,
you don't look 66.
Well, you know what? Yeah. I don't feel 66. I mean, all my stuff works, and I don't know what all the complaining is about getting old. But you know, I really pretty much can do everything that I could do, you know, when I was 25.
Yeah.
Which is saying a lot, because I've crashed a lot of things that I mean, I probably crashed more things than most people know how to drive. And
I'm not going to get in the car with you anytime soon.
Yeah. I broke my neck in a hang glider crash when I was 28.
Jeez,
and I broke it in 3 places. I think you only have 3 places in your neck. I broke all 3 of them. And I was flying in a 40-mile-an-hour wind in a competition hang glider, and just got away from me. And so it's a miracle that I can even, you know, move my digits. Yeah. But cannabis has been part of my healing process. Yeah. And I sort of became my own favorite lab animal in testing things out to find out, you know, what the truth was about this plant. Mm-hmm. And I can tell you, after having had a physical not long ago, I was applying for an insurance policy. The rating that came back on the insurance policy was as good as a rating as a person my age can get. Yeah. And my agent told me that he hadn't ever had a policy issued on a person my age at that rating. Excellent. And so, you know, it's just a way of sort of measuring the you know, long-term effects, benefits of cannabis on human health. And you know, when you look,
I was going to say there was interestingly, there was a thing where just where you say the long-term impact, because I think that's what a lot of people suggest, is that cannabis has a negative impact on your lungs in particular. Obviously, they also make the correlation between mental health and brain impairment and all these other 100% unvalidated claims. But what I've noticed, what was quite funny, was that there was when I was doing some research for a book I wrote a couple of years ago, there was a Jamaican study that had followed Rastafarians over the course of 30 years plus, and these are extremely chronic cannabis consumers, and it showed like 100% no negative impact whatsoever, because they did the breathing test, which I think is a COFR or COP or something like that, and they actually showed that they actually had a relatively an increased lung capacity in comparison to that of those that didn't consume cannabis, which implied that cannabis actually increased lung capacity over the long term and didn't negatively impact it. You know, so again, these things are just a testament to individuals who didn't have the research at the time, you know, that over the course of 20, 30, 40 years were proclaiming these things but had no evidence to back up, you know.
Exactly. And, you know, now cannabis is recognized as an expectorant that actually cleans people's lungs. That's, you know, when people cough after they've ingested cannabis, it's a method of clearing your lungs. Mm-hmm. And so when my doctor checked my lungs, he told me I have the lungs of a long distance runner. And I can tell you, I'm not a long distance runner. You know, if I get up and walk across the room, it's a big deal, you know. But I've
got the idea of you sitting there with everything on a stick.
yeah, you know, and so the truth is more interesting than the myths. Yeah. And there are so many myths about cannabis. And the fact is that cannabis affects different people in different ways at different times. You can't make generalized statements about it because everybody is different.
Yeah.
And so, one of the most underappreciated things about cannabis, I mean, a lot of people recognize that it's very effective as an herbal therapeutic and it does a lot of wonderful things, but people forget how safe cannabis is. That there's no lethal dose.
Yeah.
And that if it doesn't help you, at least it's not going to hurt you. And if there's something about it that you find unpleasant, then you can reduce your dosage or alter your method of intake. Yeah. And you can oftentimes eliminate those problems. So, there's a lot of advantage to developing familiarity with the plant as an individual, one-to-one. And that's why I recommend that people grow their own cannabis so they can develop that relationship with their medicine and with their food if they're growing seeded buds, which is I grow seeded buds. The seeds for me are the most valuable thing about the plant. And so all this, to talk about sensimilla, I don't mind cleaning the seeds out of my herb before I smoke it. Because for me, one seed means that I'm going to have another plant next year. A whole plant, a big one. So, the truth is that people have to develop their own relationship with the plant outside of the propaganda that we were all born into, that essentially the institutional slavery that we were born into, that says, you live in a free market economy, but you can't have the most valuable agricultural resource to work with. So,
it's actually perfect you saying that there, Paul, because there's a chapter in your book. I'm not sure which chapter it is, you'll be aware, but it's titled, "What is Patent 6630507?" Could you elaborate on what that is?
Well, it is the government patent that recognizes the medical efficacy of cannabis in mitigating severe head trauma and reducing the oxidative stress after a head injury. And this is something that I was aware of before my son fractured his skull when he was 4 years old in a sledding accident. But the effect of cannabis in reducing the damage to the brain after a severe head trauma is something that puts cannabis into the category of first aid. Here's another essential use of cannabis that very few people are aware of, that people really do need to be conversant in. Responsible parents, particularly, and NFL football players, and anyone who has a high probability of suffering a concussion should know that cannabis is a first aid remedy that will help to reduce the oxidative damage done
to
the brain as a result of
full extract cannabis oil. That would be the method.
Well, if you can get that would be ideal. But the way that my son was able to ingest cannabis at the age of 4 was in a green drink, the leche verde, that I made using the flowers that I had, my smoking stash, which was fortunately it was relatively new. It was less than 3 months old, and so there was no psychoactive effect in blending it up in a drink for him.
And that's interesting.
Because
Sorry, Paul. That's interesting. You would also say that statement, because I think that's something that's also, everybody's really cautious about making that statement of, I was giving it to my child, but there was no psychoactivity. The reality is, the psychoactivity is therapeutic in and of itself. And I think a lot of the time, depending on the dosage, that's like when it comes to head trauma or an immediate injury, that would complement the therapeutic value.
Well, you're absolutely correct, and I can just report that within 30 minutes of his first green drink, he was up off the couch playing with his toys.
Oh, nice.
Which hadn't happened. I was in the Bay Area when I got the call from the emergency room that he had suffered an injury. And so it took me several hours to get up to Mount Shasta where he was.
Did your son have been given pharmaceutical drugs to kind of alleviate the pain and stuff like that?
No. His mother and I are both very cautious about any kind of pharmaceuticals or vaccinations or any of that stuff. He's a home birth, never been vaccinated, never will
exactly
be.
The same. We had my son, my youngest. We had a home birth, and we had the same. I was actually I was high on cannabis when he was arriving. To be honest, it was brilliant. So it was good, but yeah, we had the same.
Well, you'll appreciate that Rio, my son, was born on Thomas Jefferson's birthday.
Right. Oh, nice.
Yeah,
that's perfect.
Which I later on learned is also Butch Cassidy's birthday.
Right.
The outlaw.
Yeah,
and so, he was also born in the state of Jefferson. The Northern California, Southern Oregon is referred to as the state of Jefferson because in the early part of the last century, they seceded from the Union. Yeah. And so he was born at the base of Mount Shasta underneath a portrait of Thomas Jefferson that my mother painted on porcelain china for the bicentennial celebration in 1976. And so there were a lot of Jeffersonian references around this guy. Yeah. And he also wound up with a prescription for cannabis when he was 4 years old. Mm. And now he's 14, and he's as healthy as a human being can be. Yeah. He is challenging himself to fulfill all the requirements of training for a Navy SEAL.
Oh, nice.
And so
that's
there's no downside to cannabis therapeutics that I can tell. He's also on the honor roll at school, and I could brag about him all day long. But you get the idea.
That's but I love to hear that. In fact, actually, do you know? Would you mind actually if you were to if you just as a compliment to you giving me your time here, Paul, would you mind if you sent me your address and I would post you this, right? This here as an illustrated book. It's called Dad's Illustrated Guide to Being a Dad. And I did this. I love it. Yeah, and I'll post you this. Would you mind? Is that okay?
I would love that.
Excellent, because I share the same sentiment there, Paul, because I'm the same. This all here, the Cannamantv stuff, everything like that. This is also my son has an easier life, and then the reality is the way I've seen this is there's something very archetypal about the father figure, and what it seems to be that our position seems to be to guide and to instruct, and I think this is what's very archetypal amongst fathers, and it's the same thing archetypally amongst mothers. It's that caring, nurturing element, and these things I think are lost through political, gender identity, things like that, when the reality is on a very subconscious level, very deep down in our neurology, there is these archetypal behaviors that seem to be consistent cross-culturally, and that's why these things, you'll appreciate it, I really. But if you could do that, I'd love to do that, Paul. I'd love that.
Bless your heart. I would absolutely love to receive, and I will send you a copy of my book.
Excellent.
In return.
Excellent. I'll review that. Do you know what I'll do then? Once I read that, I'll read that and I'll review that, and I'll put that on. I'll put like a book review on the channel, not like a review. I'll cover the detail that's in it. I'll put, this is bits, because the viewers will love that.
Fantastic.
Excellent.
That'd be wonderful.
Love that, Paul.
Brilliant. The thing is that it's the best news there is.
Yeah.
The fact is that there is something that everyone can do to help heal this planet, and that's what everybody is asking. What can we do? What can we do? Yeah. Well, what we can do is we can plant cannabis, all of us. Mm-hmm. And if you can't plant it, then you can help somebody else plant it by providing them with what they need. to garden or farm cannabis. I'm working with people all over the world right now who recognize the urgency of planting cannabis at a scale that is not only going to heal the planet, but is also going to heal human social evolution.
Yeah.
Because, when one system goes out of balance, it sets all of the other systems out of balance.
Yeah.
Because that's the nature of systemic relationship. And so, when it was decided to remove the most useful agricultural resource, the most Gaia therapeutic agricultural resource from the free market economy, then we essentially set ourselves into the trajectory that inevitably lands us where we are now, on the brink of extinction.
Yeah.
And so, the good news is we may be able to pull ourselves out of the spin that we're in. I am an aviator, a third generation aviator, actually. And so I think about flying the planet in aviation terms.
Yeah.
And not crashing it like I did my hang glider. I learned a lot.
You had some people signing off in a minute ago there.
Yeah. Hopefully I can fly the planet better than I could fly an X-160. But
the same engine.
The truth is, if this doesn't work, really, there isn't anything else that will.
Yeah.
I've heard the geoengineering schemes that are being proposed, the Pinatubo effect and all this other stuff, floating mirrors in space. Come on. Cannabis can do all that stuff at a fraction of the cost with none of the environmental downsides and all of the environmental services. Yeah. So, it's a very easy choice to make, and our elected officials need to be told, because as Frederick Douglass said in 1857, power concedes nothing without a demand. It never has, and it never will. And we need to understand that that's still true today. Yeah. And the powers that are controlling our governments have been controlling them since before we were born. Mm-hmm. And so for us to overcome that inertia, we need to recognize the power of the truth and to apply it and to demand that the THC lie be dispelled, and that we are told the truth about the essential properties of cannabis. I wrote to the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization for several years before they would even allow my postings to be shared with the other scientists on the forum. Yeah. I had to write to the forum participants individually in order to break through the UN resistance to the information about cannabis seed nutrition. And finally, in 2016, food security was part of the drug policy discussion at the UN in Vienna. And so it took from 2002, when I started writing to the UN forum, until 2016 before food security became part of the United Nations discussion. Mm-hmm. And, it's just, we don't have that kind of time left for the because every spring that passes is an opportunity that's gone forever. We don't know how many planting seasons we have left to make a difference. Yeah. So we have to assume that we don't have any to waste.
No, and certainly don't. Definitely, probably 100% right. Well, the thing is as well, that's what. How do you feel since you wrote your book? What do you think? Like, genuinely speaking, we're going to have to get going in a minute here, Paul. But if you were to say, like, since 2015 to now, what would you generalize the progress has been? Minimal.
Too little, too late.
Yeah.
It may be too late. I mean, I don't like to be pessimistic because there's no percentage in that. Optimism is the only choice.
Yeah.
We have to assume that it's not too late. But the truth is, urgency is the greatest part of what I bring to the discussion. The urgency of having the cannabis versus climate change discussion at COP26, for example, is something that, it's just unacceptable to exclude cannabis from the COP26 conversation. And I understand that the application was made and denied, which, that's just a sign of dysfunction. I mean, any system of governance that doesn't recognize the true essential value of cannabis isn't qualified to lead, because the only government that is qualified to lead is the government that knows how to heal the planet. Because if we don't heal the planet, then nothing else that we're doing matters at all.
I 100%
so
agree, Paul. 100%.
I mean, this is how to heal the planet right here. There's no other way, and it's good if people just are clear on that, and understand why that is, and the amount of time that it takes for people to understand why that's what's true will determine the quality of life on this planet for everybody's children. And so it's in everybody's best interest to just take an objective look at cannabis and say, well, can it replace fossil fuels and nuclear energy and eliminate the need to fight wars for oil? Can it feed the population? Can we expand the arable base with a non-invasive pioneer crop that provides complete nutrition and complete existence, complete autonomy for people on a regional scale? It seems like such an easy choice to make. And the only thing that there is to overcome is the knee-jerk reflex, the irrational social prejudice against the plant, which, that would be kind of a silly reason for us to become extinct.
That's hilarious when you think about it like that. We just made ourselves extinct through ignorance.
There's just because we didn't believe that there was a solution. I have a hashtag on my Twitter account. Climate solution deniers are more dangerous than climate change itself. So climate solution deniers are populating COP26 right now because they're not open to cannabis inclusive solutions. And unfortunately, nothing else will work. And so I challenge anybody to come up with a better solution to healing the Earth's atmosphere, soil, water, air, and wildlife. There just isn't a better way. And it's interesting in the King James Bible, it's actually prophesied in Revelations 2:22 that the tree of life, whose leaves will heal the nations, is referenced in a book that is used in our legal system, and I believe in your legal system as well, upon which people swear oaths and swear to tell the truth in courts of law. And so those words and what's in that book is part of the legal system. And so on the first page, cannabis is referenced twice as every herb-bearing seed and every green herb. It's a quote, actually, from God, who is supposed to have said those words, repeated himself on the first page of the Bible, as the herbs being part of mankind's legacy that we've been given. And so our freedom to farm every herb-bearing seed is the first test of religious freedom. Any prohibition laws that prevent our access to any herb-bearing seed is a violation of our religious freedoms. And so we can challenge the rightful jurisdiction of court based on the fact that drugs don't make seeds. Herbs make seeds. And so the legal distinction between drugs and herbs is quite clear. And the legal advantage of a spiritual orientation to agriculture and a spiritual orientation to industry is something that is lacking right now from our social evolution. and respect for nature is lacking from our social evolution. And so respect for nature means not only not harming nature, it also means assessing the value, the true value of what nature has to offer. Yeah, it's fascinating. I could have done anything with my life, Connor, and I chose to be a cannabis scholar when I learned about the value of this plant, because it's the fundamental challenge of our time. It was the biggest challenge there was. It was the biggest windmill out there to attack. Yeah. And I took it on when I was 35. Before that, I was the director for Sea Shepherd in Hawaii, and was working to protect the marine environment. But I recognized cannabis as a more fundamental issue, and so I turned Sea Shepherd over to a friend of mine, and I started Project Peace, which you referenced earlier. Yeah. But
were you consuming cannabis as you were prior to being 35? Were you consuming cannabis your whole life?
Oh, yeah. After I graduated from college, I decided I wanted to find out the truth about the plant, because I had heard all my life, that it was bad, and I wanted to find out for myself. And so when I completed my college studies and got my degree from Humboldt State University, by the way.
Oh, of course it was. That's so perfect.
I was born and educated in the Emerald Triangle, essentially, and Northern California is where I grew up. So I was a grower up in the Emerald Triangle for years, as well, back in the woods, when it was fun. and I've basically seen every facet of this industry, both from the historical OG perspective, and also from the contemporary cannabis cultural perspective, as a documentary filmmaker, just observing other people doing all kinds of things with the plant, essentially going where no other cannabis activist has gone before, with my cameras. I mean, I filmed the harvesting of cannabis in Noirmoutier in France back in 2003, riding on the outside of a combine over the blades, filming the harvest, and filming on the inside of a seed dryer with a shower of hemp seeds, all around me. I mean, I've gone to the bowels of the hemp industry in order to film it, and to show people, this is really exciting stuff. I mean, I've been a commercial diver, I've been a freelance photographer, I'm an aviator. I do fun things in my life, and have done and continue to do. And I can promise you that if you invest yourself in cannabis, you will not be disappointed. And right now I've put it out there to investors. Look, if you give me $100,000 in a year, I'll give you $1 million back. If you give me $1 million in a year, I'll give you $1 billion. And if you give me $1 billion in a year, I'll give you $1 trillion, because that is the latent potential of this industry that hasn't been recognized. The fuel production potential of cannabis, at the same time that the food production potential of cannabis is being realized, can happen concurrently with the healing of the planet and all of the credits and economic incentives that go along with that, and expansion of the arable base. That's something I mentioned earlier, but expanding the arable base to increase the carrying capacity of the planet is possible with only one plant. Exactly. Cannabis will increase the carrying capacity of the earth. And so, again, we come back to why cannabis is essential. And I think that's probably the third or fourth reason.
Yeah. Hey, I think we're on double digits.
I
think we're on double digits now, Paul. I think cannabis is but yeah, just, I mean, literally, I'm going to have to get going, Paul, but a personal question what I was going to ask you. I was doing this earlier on today. I got sent over from the Scottish Hemp Association, like a report, and it was just about hemp and obviously what, it was essentially just a general brief overview, introduction kind of thing of pictures of hemp fields. And as I was like looking over it, it was just a kind of, I mean, you'll see it on the channel in the next few days, but as I was reading down on it, you hear me talking on it, and it's like one of the things that confuses me, and I was like just kind of verbalizing it as I was doing the report, and it's always kind of thinking about is the genealogy lineage of hemp. Like, where did it come from? Like, what is this? It seems like an aberration almost, because you've got, like, obviously indica sativa, ruderalis. Hemp seems to contain ruderalis content, but it's also like resinous production. Has there just been, and what I'd said on the video, because it was literally just the video I did 2 minutes before we started speaking. What I'd said on it was that at the moment, what I believe is that hemp is a byproduct of the suppression in the beginning of the 20th century. Therefore, they suppressed the THC content through a manipulative growing process, and that's what then led to industrial hemp. Is that what we're dealing with now?
Well, the plant has been on the planet for 35 million years.
Yeah,
and
but
so
exactly. But the thing,
where it came from,
confusion element. Sorry, and the confusing element for me is this industrial element that we do have. Was it always a case where there was essentially a diverse spectrum of relatively sativa-like physical characteristics, indica physical characteristics, and then these all interproduced seed anyway, and they could all be used for hemp, and then hemp came as a result of industrial processes at the beginning of the 20th century? Or was it always this individual hemp variety that was very convenient for industrial process that produced low THC? Was that the alternative? Like, what was there?
The plant produces a relatively low level of THC just when it's left to its own processes.
Right.
The level of THC in feral hemp is, within, 5%, maybe. There's some genetic drift, and so there could be higher or lower, right. Depending on things like elevation, where there's more intense UVB will right. stimulate resin production and therefore elevate THC production. If there is a condition where the plants are suffering from pest infestation, they may react by producing more THC in order to defend themselves. The plant is very adaptable and very responsive. Yeah. And that's one of the reasons that you can breed the same seeds over and over and over again in the same soil and climate conditions, and watch the plant adapt to those conditions over time. And so, it is thought that early humans started in the Levant region around where Israel is now, and that people came out of the Ice Age and were following the seasons, and they noticed that the animals were, eating the hemp. And so they gathered the hemp seeds and started distributing them on their migratory routes, and because they knew that they could come back there and hunt the animals that were attracted to the hemp and took advantage of the cover. And they found that they could use the plant for a lot of different things. And so they started caching it when people became sedentary and started farming. Cannabis was one of the first things that human beings farmed. And so it was natural that as humans distributed themselves throughout the world, that they would carry cannabis with them in order to settle new places. And that's how cannabis spread from, it's thought, Asia and Africa throughout the world. Right. And people recognized that it was an essential crop. And that is something that unfortunately we have forgotten, and we've really suffered for it, because we never should have ever cut down the boreal forests, because there was no 80% of the boreal forests were cut down to make paper. And, we can make better paper out of cannabis than from trees. So if cannabis was never prohibited, then the paper industry would have gravitated toward the most cost effective and the least environmentally harmful. And, that's hemp. And, the THC levels in cannabis can be manipulated in any number of ways. And, the things that people are doing with the plant can be achieved if some rules are broken. And unfortunately, there are people that are willing to break the laws of nature in order to manipulate cannabis for their own desired outcomes. And it's very dangerous. It's part of, the attitude of disrespect for nature that has gotten us to where we are now. And we need to recognize that we need to respect nature and respect the processes of nature when we're working with the cannabis plant. Otherwise, we could wind up paying an unintended consequence for toying with something that we don't fully understand. And we have to be humble about our knowledge level when it comes to nature. We're still we know less than we do know.
No, I fully agree. And I think one of the things that makes it most painfully evident is when you look at shamans and individuals who are still very close to nature and natural processes. They have a very intimate knowledge of the earth, and it seems from the Western perspective rudimentary or archaic, and it's quite the opposite, and it's actually these individuals have been able to sustain these environments for hundreds of thousands of years, and here we are, we'd struggle to stay outside for 2 nights without our phone and stuff like that. This is not a reflection of evolution, but no, honestly, Paul, let's say we've essentially covered everything I wanted to talk about. Did you want to say anything before we get going?
Not that I can think of. I mean, there's always something more to say, but I just want to say thank you, Connor. I really appreciated, the interview that you did with Sam the Cannon. I wonder why they call him that. But he's not here, so we can talk about him.
Sounds good guy. He's a great guy. He'll be listening.
And I just really look forward to more of your work. You're doing great work, and you are the hope for the future. I'm on my way out. I've achieved my use by date. So it's whatever I can do to help you with what you're doing, let me know. But I look forward to getting your book and, trading some dad stories with you sometime, because I do think it's really important for us to regain and our proper stature within the social matrix, and not delegate the raising of our children to institutions that are seeking to manipulate and control. Because the fact that you had a home birth with your child, and let me ask you this: how old is your child?
7.
All right.
Yeah, he's 7.
Oh, my favorite. Oh, that's such a great age. I'm so happy for you, bro.
He's brilliant. He's great. I'll be honest. I mean, he really is like my 100% gift from the universe. As well as anybody, Paul, it's like there's something that you can't relate. There's something like, I'd actually described it to an individual the other day I was talking to, and she was talking about her daughter, and she was like, honestly, it sounds silly, but when I look at her, it's like I see divinity. And she giggled about this woman. She felt nervous when you said it, and I was like, and I never laughed at all, because I take this thing very seriously. And I was like, you have to understand. I was like, you don't need to feel insecure about that, because that's what you're seeing. These religious texts and these mythological representations of human action are doing nothing more than tell us what we're doing now. These things are indicating to us what's present, what's been, and what will always be. And they're here to tell us in order to guide us in the right direction. And I think describing it as looking as a divine is exactly that, because what closer to that, like bright white light could you get than a parent's love for their child? That's what you're looking at directly. And I think we can only we put it into metaphor in this form of story. But the truth is this is universal, you know, and it is a fundamental. Very often, you know, it's like in human society, we look for truth and it gets diluted in individuals' opinion and all these different things. But some things there are normative values in society, and I think things like traditional values of parenting is one of them. I also think the family structure, and the what would seem as a traditional dynamic of male-female unity is the most stable application for human future. I don't think that what they describe with like, oh no, it's like be independent, be free, be blah 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 blah. No. That's I don't know what it is. I don't believe in any, I don't believe in a specific theology. I'm not Christian, not Buddhism. I believe that there is an underpinning truth that is essentially mixed in between every single one of these thought processes. And you find it through philosophy, and you find it through what would be seemingly esoteric thinkers. And interestingly, it seems to be that to isolate yourself from society's mechanics gets you closer to what's true. It's very unusual. It's almost as if there's a pendulum that's present for the human to just be allowed to. There's this weird dichotomy that I think to myself about this, Paul, that it's almost as if it's like anything. Like, do you know what it's like? It's like we've been given conscious in order to appreciate what's there. That's what it feels like. And that's what it feels like. The spectrum of evil and God, or evil and good, that kind of thing, is the spectrum of hot and cold. If you're talking about temperature, we just articulate it differently. You know, and I think that's what sometimes it gets lost through tribalism. You know, I'm Christian, I've been born here, I've been born there. You're losing the traditional, the basic truth that they're all telling you, that there is this pulse that exists through us all. And I think psychedelics break the barrier of physical senses that allow us to see this, you know. Sorry, Paul.
I couldn't agree more. I couldn't agree more with
ages.
No, I couldn't agree more with everything you just said. Yeah. You know, you're absolutely 100% right on. Yeah. And I think it's important for us to also understand that there are entities that are subverting our awareness of our responsibility by imposing their will on us and proving that they can manipulate us if they want to. And that's part of what's going on right now, which is so troubling, is that, you know, the manipulation of the entire global population is based on, you know, something that is so convoluted and inconsistent. You know, the vacillation between the treatment protocols and the misreporting of, you know, vaccine injuries, you know, even the terminology. I mean, using the word vaccine for an mRNA injection is disingenuous. It's not even a vaccine, you know? Yeah. And so it's all beyond credibility. And what it comes down to is, you know, when the rubber meets the road, you know, who's going to take care of your child? Yeah. It's you and your child's mother.
Yeah, exactly.
And that's who's going to take care of your child. Yeah. And what do you need to do that? You need fertile hemp seed. And if you have fertile hemp seed, then you can take care of your child in most situations. And that's true for everyone on the planet, because it grows just about everywhere. And so once we establish that that is a baseline for security, then we can appreciate the ripple effect that that type of security can have on the rest of our social evolution, where we no longer need to fight over unevenly distributed resources. We no longer need to fear, you know, starvation. But right now, I mean, most people should be very worried about starving to death. You know, because the planet is heating up, the soil is drying out, the conditions are changing. The data that, people want to collect, well, the baselines are changing. Yeah. So by the time you collect the data, the baseline that you started with is already moved. And that's the problem, is that, the situation is very, very easy to observe from a logical standpoint. The fact that half of the boreal forests are gone, that's something that is known. That's a known, a given. And, once you establish that, and once you establish the effects of that, the increased UVB radiation, I didn't mention earlier, one of the effects of UVB is that it increases the solubility of mercury and arsenic out of aqueous solution. And so, the toxicity of the hydrologic cycle of the earth, the potential for, people having their judgment clouded by increased mercury absorption is something that, we wouldn't even know is happening. It might be happening right now, where people's judgment is clouded by mercury. Yeah. So, we have to be aware that to initiate these changes that need to happen, we need to go beyond the traditional approaches. The essential civilian demand is something that where the rubber meets the road, in protecting our families. Sometimes we have to demand things, clean air, clean water, good food.
It seems like the bare minimum we should expect, really. And 2021, come on, man, we should be here. We should be way further past this. It's almost as if it's a joke. That's why sometimes I think to myself that this has all been a long con by the hidden hand that's really maintained continuous control, because it seems like ignorance isn't a good enough excuse, or profitability isn't a good enough excuse why cannabis has been too much. There seems to be something malicious, malevolent, that's been at hand here.
Well, it's the competition from the industries that we currently give our money to. The fossil fuels industry is using its political influence to maintain the prohibition of industrial hemp by maintaining the fraudulent scheduling of marijuana. So it's all sort of, the imbalances connected to other imbalances, the way systems operate. And for us to regain control of the system, we need to initiate a federal protocol. In the United States, it's a federal protocol that's referenced in several emergency preparedness documents that recognize cannabis as a strategic resource. Cannabis is recognized as a strategic resource at the same time that it's scheduled under Schedule 1. And so that's a conflict that is just irresolvable. You can't have something that's critical to national security that also has no use whatsoever. So, the absurdity of it comes back to the fact that, solutions are simple. It's the problems that are complicated. Yeah. And we absolutely need to understand that time is the limiting factor. Time is the limiting factor in the equation of survival. And so because we have a limited amount of time, because we know what to do, because we have everything we need to do what needs to be done, then the only thing that remains is for us to lead our leaders. Yeah. Because good leaders follow good advice. Yeah. And the best advice right now is to put hemp seed into as many hands around the world as we can, as quickly as possible. That's the equation of survival. That will determine our success or failure. And the rest of it can be hashed out later. Pardon the pun.
I love that, Paul. That's great. We'll wrap up there then, Paul. This has been an absolute pleasure. Honestly, this has been brilliant. I really look forward to receiving your book. I'll send that over. The thing is, I've actually got, I added you on Facebook, and I'm not sure if I've added you on Twitter yet as well, but you'll see on my Facebook, if you go onto it, it'll come up as Tubusaur Tunes. That's my name on Facebook, Tubusaur Tunes. But if you click into it, at the very top of the page, what I've done is I've posted my very first ever Cannamantv comic, because this guy here, he's from a Cannamantv comic series, and because I do like illustrations as well as like I've also got like a book that I would love to send you as well as the dad's one, which
Fabulous.
is a non-fiction book, completely academically referenced. I try to give like a broad spectrum analysis of all the main points of cannabis, endocannabinoid system, deficiency, stuff like that.
Excellent.
But if you look on the Facebook page, the Tubasaur Tunes, right at the very top, it's pinned. There's the very first comic. It's called Nature's Miracle Cure, and essentially what I've done is I've made it that the police chief's wife has a tumor. She has to take cannabis oil. I made it the police chief's wife on purpose, obviously. She used to take the cannabis oil, and then inevitably I then follow little cannabinoids through the system, whereas it attacks the malicious tumor, and then they reactivate the endocannabinoid system, resetting the endocannabinoid system. So yeah, please have a look at it and let me know what you think, because I really do think you'll get, you'll enjoy it.
Fabulous. Do you know I'm an illustrator as well?
No, I did not know that. I think I would be much more cautious about telling you my stuff if I was aware of this.
Well, you can check out my Instagram page. I have several, I think, of my editorial cartoons posted on my Instagram page. I think I sent you some links, too many links.
Yeah, I like that. I laughed at that. I was like, too many links. And then I realized, I like that. I like that. It's good.
That's what happens when you live this long. Yeah. You just have too many links.
Not at all. So what is your Instagram? What's your Instagram account?
It is just my name, Paul von Hartmann.
Oh, perfect. Mine will just come up Cannamantv1, and you're about to see the same again. I'm looking forward to this then, Paul. Like,
yeah.
Really good.
I've been making illustrations since I was a kid. I love it.
Well, yeah. I will much more appreciate your feedback then. This is going to be very interesting. Be gentle.
Oh, well, everything that I've seen that you've done so far, Connor, has been just top shelf, impressive. And
thank you very much.
I can see that you're going to have a great future ahead of you, in a much better world, because between you, me, and Sam the Cannon, we've got them surrounded.
Thanks to Paul for giving me his time, and thanks to you for sticking around until the end of the video. I sincerely hope you enjoyed the content. I'll see you next time.